As many of you know, the Andrews Labor government are trying to rush through the Parliament a highly controversial and extremely powerful bill, the Public Health and Wellbeing Amendment Pandemic Management Bill 2021, otherwise known as the Pandemic Powers Bill. I wanted to take just a few minutes to explain in some detail the background of the bill and what it will mean if it passes the Upper House during next week. The Pandemic Powers Bill was introduced in the last sitting week, and debate was severely restricted by the government. It was passed in the same sitting week, with the government using its massive lower house majority to do so. It will be debated in the upper house next week, which means we have limited time to convince Labor and Labor voting independent MPs that this bill must not pass. What the government proposes in this bill will fundamentally change Victoria's pandemic response to give greater power to the Premier and his government. If this bill is allowed to pass, they would be able to control and punish Victorians for doing things that in other states and in other times were not against the law. Thousands of Victorians have written to me, worried about how this bill will change their lives and change the future of this state. Let me explain why so many people are rightly concerned about this Pandemic Powers Bill. Firstly, Section 165AI declares the Minister for Health, quote, may make any order that the Minister believes is reasonably necessary to protect public health. This includes forcing us into lockdowns, extending lockdowns, restricting movements, prohibiting gatherings and business operations, requiring medical examination, and the list goes on. It will no longer be the Chief Health Officer who authorises pandemic orders, which include lockdowns, but a politician, a government minister. This is hugely concerning because that minister can make long-term decisions on nearly every aspect of how we go about our daily lives, so long as they think that such a pandemic order is reasonably necessary. I mean, what does reasonably necessary even mean? And why is it considered appropriate for this power to be invested in one politician, therefore negating the need for parliamentary scrutiny and interrogation? A minister in a future government with a future pandemic originating in another nation may determine that it is reasonably necessary to lock down Victorians without this decision being based on health advice nor scrutinised by the Parliament. Now, giving a minister such a broad range of power is simply dangerous. It's just plain wrong. Secondly, Section S165AS says that only the Parliament can disallow a pandemic order by the Minister if an established parliamentary committee, the Scrutiny of Acts and Regulations Committee, recommends it. Yet at the same time, when making its investigation, the committee is not allowed to ask questions about why this pandemic order is necessary. It can only recommend that it be disallowed on very narrow grounds. This is very troubling for two reasons. Firstly, the government MPs ordinarily make up the majority of this committee. It's therefore extremely unlikely for government MPs to make a recommendation that contradicts their colleagues' pandemic order. And secondly, if the current government had any regard for the Scrutiny of Acts and Regulations Committee in the first place, well, why did they not make this committee review the Pandemic Powers Bill before it was rushed through the Assembly? Ultimately, this means that the Parliament does not have any power to debate or vote on any pandemic order. Thirdly, Section 165AK4 states that pandemic orders can, quote, differentiate between persons or classes of person identified by reference to an attribute within the meaning of the Equal Opportunity Act 2010. This means that pandemic orders can be made for people based on their attributes, not just their medical condition, but their gender, their race, their age, their religion, their political belief, their marital status, and so it goes on. It clearly allows the minister to target specific groups of people by not just their physical attributes, but their views and opinions as well. This is divisive. This is discriminatory and is not necessary for this bill at all. Words have meanings, and although the Premier has insisted that he does not intend to use these powers in this way, why then are they included in this bill at all? You see, my concern with this bill is not just that these far-reaching laws are at the disposal of this government, but that they may be at the disposal of every future government, without regard for the number of the members of that government and their makeup. This is one of the reasons, perhaps the main reason, why the Liberal Nationals have committed to repeal this bill should it pass the upper house next week, and should we be elected to government after the November 2022 state election. Of course, there are many more issues with this bill that I do not have time to articulate in this short video, such as stronger safeguards to withhold QR code check-in data from law enforcement, or the fact that the government are not required to release the health advice informing the pandemic order until 14 days after the order comes into effect. If you are concerned about Labor's pandemic power bill, as I am, I'd encourage you to have your say at laborspowergrab.com.au. Please go to that website, laborspowergrab.com.au. Join the fight to stop this bill and join this fight today.